Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the Test More, Worry Less webinar we're doing at Worksoft. Excited to hear your feedback. We will have the question and answers at the end, so I'll go on and get started. Our agenda is we want to look at enterprise testing perspective. What does it mean to do enterprise testing? What are key considerations for test automation? What's the Worksoft solution? We'll do a demo and we'll have our Q&A. What are the different types of tests? Because a lot of people mentioned you're doing Agile and so forth, a lot of people think about developers do unit tests and API tests. Then there's functional regression tests. Over on the left, those your Agile three amigos. What are you doing? Those three business analysts, QA, and developers working together. And then on top of that, you've got security updates, and then your overall ERP packages and user experience. And all those type of things individually can have very specific testing that's done before moving to production. One of the biggest challenges we find is that all of those areas have different types of changes. So application changes, like is an existing application, we're changing a process or data. Is there a new bit of functionality, a new application coming part of your end-to-end process? There's also a lot of operational updates. With the introduction of Dev and Ops, or DevOps, what's happened is server updates, security patches, vendor patches, network updates, firewall rules, all those things are rolling in much faster on a repeated basis, the same way we're getting code changes in there. And the third thing that's changing is actually just our clients. We're getting a lot more updates to our browser, right? You get lots of Chrome updates. You get security updates on your Windows platform. You get new versions of Mac OS versions, new devices, new versions of devices. So if we think about the different changes, it's not something that just a developer can say, I made a change to code, I've covered it with a unit test. It's that is also wrapped by all the backend servers, patches to your operating systems, your firewalls, and the clients, like your browsers are updating quite a bit. So enterprise testing goes beyond just thinking of the simple application changes. It's how do all these three things layer on top of each other. So to give a real world example, you may say, well, we don't do a lot of development. We use SuccessFactors or Concur, SAP Cloud for Customer, or Salesforce, right? Well, they have their scheduled updates. So this means you may not change your process, but in the background, they're updating the screens to make them more optimized. It may not be a physical change you see, and maybe they're just updating their scripting engines, their APIs to be more faster, more effective. So there's changes that are constantly happening from your package applications and your hosted applications, along with all the things you're doing. So what we say is, hey, when you think about Agile, all of these things working together, more releases a year means more testing events and more need to actually test all these things working together. So this is where we really say we focus on enterprise business process assurance. So why Worksoft? How do you worry less? Well, you test more, but it's not doing just an API test or just unit test. It's like, how do you test your end-to-end tests that address specific risks that cannot be addressed by earlier testing? Because a lot of times earlier testing of stubbed up systems, different pieces aren't there. So we really want to talk about how do you do the end-to-end testing for your final delivery and realize underneath that could be system changes, application changes, or say browser changes. So this is a great white paper by Paul Gerard. It's available in the download section of the webinar, and there's also a link to pull it from our website. Okay. So why is enterprise testing so hard to automate? Because a lot of people have tried this, right? Well, and many times, we don't understand the big end-to-end process. Or it's actually very complex. It's lots of roles, lots of different divisions of the organization and moving parts. It tends to be very UI-driven, right? So from the user's perspective, how's the system working? So that means there's got to be a lot of cross-team collaboration, from the sales orders to the distribution, to the invoicing, to the delivery. There's a lot of different teams that are stakeholders in this end-to-end process. And making one change, say, to an delivery process may affect upstream systems or downstream billing systems. Sometimes we don't realize that a change in the database or the infrastructure has upstream and downstream changes, right? Firewall rules turning on and off can break upstream and downstream systems. Or people say, I just don't have time to do that end-to-end testing. We just throw it in production and hope it works, right? it's just really hard to do, is what we hear people say. The other thing you say is, well, we tried this before. We're off to a great start. We started with this tool. We started writing scripts. Then all of a sudden they realized they needed a lot more people to participate. It couldn't be just developers and scripters writing tests. It needed to be non-technical users, and they couldn't use those tools. And maintenance is really a big challenge. It's one thing to write a test once, but can you maintain it when the system changes or the process changes, right? Are they saying our tests don't scale? We can't run them in parallel. It's too difficult to customize the tools, or the tool doesn't work fast enough with this app. So we've heard a lot of people say, I got started, but I ran into problems. I couldn't get to where I wanted to be. But we've tried to address this in the past, so they kind of step away. Well, in reality, we have customers who have gone through that. And we believe the essential differentiation is, are you starting with a testing platform, an automation platform that's code-based or no code? And our assertion is, we honestly believe that a no-code approach is the way to go. So if you look at, this was work done by one of our customers in a PSC. How many people and time did it take to automate steps? And what they found is, with UFT, they're getting 1 step an hour, and a PSC with second part, they're getting 13 steps an hour. But with Worksoft, they're getting 28 steps an hour. So the number of steps and basically their test steps that they're offering was dramatically faster with Worksoft, because we have a code-free approach. And this basically allowed them to complete their entire test beds. They were able to save a lot of time because they weren't manually running them, and they had 70% coverage, a dramatically higher level of coverage itself. So, test more, worry less. Well, that's what we're talking about here. So how do you get to that level? So what does the Worksoft solution look like? Well, the key is we're built on an innovative technology that's really easy to adapt and scale, right? We've always had the object action framework, which separates the identification and clicking of buttons and entering things in the UI from the actual statement of action. And there's no code behind that, so you don't have to worry about, I recorded, I generated code, and now I have to go play with it and work with it, right? We do keep our all the tests and the assets centralized in a database. It's easily indexed. You can find things and leverage them and reuse them, so you don't get test sprawl and problems like that. We do have a very modular design. We encourage, reuse of test assets, whether it's data or processes, which allow people to actually scale and get lots of tests created. But the key is, because we're very modular and we allow you to do very strong reusage, say, of sub-processes, you don't end up with a whole bunch of stuff to maintain. That tends to always be the problem. They say, I built all this, but I can't maintain it when there's changes. Obviously, there's a extensibility framework, and we really feel that our key to capture for automated discovery for the business is really what helps us. We have capture allows business users to capture the process, document it, and then handshake it to QA. So this is really a dramatic shift and saves a ton of time. Okay. Now, if you look at this as a desire, another thing we found, we polled y'all, said how many people are doing Agile, how many people are moving towards DevOps, and over 50% of the people were some Agile, and there's some people that were completely Agile. So it makes sense, and what we've learned through the evolution of people adopting Agile and DevOps, it does drive standardization. So organizations seek to optimize their IT tooling, the automation, the orchestration, the same way we do with applications. We want to do the tools we do to build those applications. So we really want to make sure that business users can collaborate with developers and testers to describe the business process, what to use, and then allow the testers to then know exactly what to automate and handshake with operations, have the tests run, part of it, say, DevOps pipeline, and build large end-to-end regression tests that operations can run at any time. So even if they need to make a small patch, a security patch, they can actually go do a smoke test and verify everything's working well. So key is, when we get on a consistent tool for all this automation, everybody can leverage it. An example of this in the pure DevOps pipeline report was people said the sharing of best practices and higher degrees of well-designed automation were the keys to make DevOps successful. Well, it's my assertion that you should do the same thing with your test automation, right? If your automation platform lets you discover, run automated tests, get your business process procedure reports, get your documentation, your training manuals, and then say do validation of your disaster DR sites, your disaster recovery sites, or your other automations. If we do the same thing that DevOps has done and get well automated across there, we'll be much more successful. Okay. So how do we actually break down these silos? So, like, how does this actually work? Well, the idea is we need automated discovery. So we need to discover the business process. What are the screens? What are the data? How do we move from application 1 to application 2? That's what we do with our capture products. Then the business analysts can see those captures, and they can find duplicates, how a process is similar. They can generate documentation on that. So you'll see in the second column, the GenDoc is the screens, the field, the data, all that documentation is auto-generated. And the nice thing is that it's directly imported into the test automation tool. So you start building your automation based on what the users have done. So it solves the problem. So what screen did they run on? What data did they enter here? You know, what did they click? Well, all that stuff is inherited across the way. And then, of course, you want to run it from your platform. So whether you're running it from, say, Solution Manager with SAP or HPLM, or you're driving to a Jenkins DevOps continuous integration, continuous testing pipeline, we're going to run that automation from any of those tools and get the results back. So we want to be flexible that we can actually do all those things. And the nice thing is once you've run them and you've identified these processes, run those processes elsewhere. Use them to verify your disaster recovery environments instead of manually doing them. Because any solid end-to-end test that says, is my business running, can actually be used to validate your DR sites, right? It's the same thing that has to be done, which will save tons of manual hours. Okay, so at this point, I'm actually going to walk over and do a demo. So what I have is I have a Fiori application. So the idea is I've got a business user, and they're actually implementing a new sales order process, and they need to tell, say from a business perspective, this is doing what I expect it to do. They also need to do things like tell the testers, how does it work, what fields I enter, what data, and then we build the automation. So when we say no code is important and discovery is really valuable, what does that look like? So I've opened Capture on the right, and I'm going to come over and as a user, just use a system. So what we usually say is, hey user, let's install this little thing called Capture and do your daily job. And as you do your job, we'll start documenting the process and get screenshots and all the information you need to understand what's happening. I did not get my start. Oops. Oh, no, it's there. I was just being impatient, so I'll keep recording. So the idea is I saw there on the home page, they hit the execute. I'll type my next thing, so I'll do OR. So as I'm walking through the application, you'll notice on the right, all the fields are entering. So the value is that we're understanding and seeing it. We're putting a screenshot there. We know the data and all the fields are doing. So think about from a test automation perspective, how convenient would it be to know how they work through the application and all the test data versus interviewing them, writing this on Notepad or putting in a Word, trying to do screenshots, which can take 7 or 8 hours to do something like this. And I'll type away, finish my order. And today's the 17th. Okay, so you notice as I'm typing, it's immediately entering the data on the right. I'll enter my material. I'll put my quantity. And I'll hit enter so I can see, yep, I've entered my bike meters. I'll click save. And then from a business user's perspective, they would probably go through and say, okay, this is the sales order number. Let me click that. That's important. So now the nice thing is they didn't have to write any code. They didn't do anything different or crazy. They just did what they would normally do. And Capture on the right has found all those things and documented it for me. So I'll click stop. And we can see I've got a nice capture listing here which describes everything I've done in the process, right? All the way across. So this is where we say, okay, business, your reward for helping me do this, let's go send this to Analyze so you can compare what you've done with what other people have done. So I'll save to our Analyze. And this was actually bike parts. And so instead of, I previously did bike paint, I'm now going to order some bike parts. I'll describe it, and I'll save to Analyze. So what's happening is I've sent this up to the central Analyze. Now the convenient thing is that means that lots of people can share this and start seeing how they're working together, okay? So if I come over here and I say capture listing, what this does is lets me share my assets with other people. And if anybody know me or send me a webinar, I admit it, I can't type and talk at the same time, so I often have to pause. So I can see here, in the last 30 minutes, I did this capture called bike orders. I'll expand this out. Let's get a little bigger screen here. So I can see what the bike orders are, say in the last hour. Okay, some other people doing some work in the last 24 hours. Okay, there's people who've ordered bike parts, mirrors, paint. So I can see all the different work that people are doing. So for me, with my specific one that I've done right now, I'm going to go create documentation. And I'll give a template of best friend. And I'm also going to go create automation. So this is how I'm going to handshake to my counterparts in testing and in QA. Okay? So what's actually happened? I've created a documented process. I can actually say, is this similar to other processes? Well, I can see some other people have done this same process of creating an order and fulfillment. So at a highest level, yep, 4 other people have done something very similar. If I say, am I repeating my activities? Are multiple, say, manual tests or different people who are entering sales orders, are we doing it in a similar way? Or I can say, are there actually exact duplicates? So it turns out that 4 of us have actually done this the exact same way. So that means that we've actually done these processes the same way. So I can actually start looking at, am I doing things similar? Why is this important? Well, if we've entered the same order 4 different times, I shouldn't have 4 manual tests or 4 automated tests. What I want is I want one test that's automated that handles all 4 data scenarios. So I help you start analyzing those things and figuring out how should I do my best practices. So if I look at my documents, I can see that I've created my bike parts here. I'll open up my report. So this is what's really great. This is what people love to see. They can see, wow, I'm running best run. I can see here's my process. Now I can actually get a screenshot of what they entered. What did it look like, right? And all the different screens, okay? So now ideally, with not just the screens, I'm finding out, okay, they put in 1710 into the sales order. I entered 10 into the organization. I put 00 into the distribution, right? So from a narrative perspective, I'm getting all the details of how they traverse the application and the data. So this is great. This describes my business process. So I could share, say, this is the positive scenario for this. This is the data I needed. I could create a training manual out of this. I could say this is a business process procedure to say this is how it works. Or in Agile, I could say this is my done criteria. I have validated the system works. I could use it as my exploratory test documentation to say I sign off that this process is working correctly. Okay, so that's the value of the business people or QA people are very functional oriented. Now on the other side, what happens is you've got automation engineers. So what they need to do is they need to actually start build automation from this. So if I come here and I'm going to say I want to import my process, oops, not that one, from Analyze. I want to import my process from Analyze Generated Automation. I can see here's my Bark Parts 1 that I just did. It's in Capture Listing. I'll say select yes. And I'm going to say this is actually, I want to group this into my Fiori web applications. So I can group these all together so I get ease of maintenance is what that's showing actually. So I can see here, now I have a test case. It says I can create a sales order document. I can see all the different steps. So from the tester's perspective, I didn't have to go through and do a lot of difficult things. What I did is I just did my normal processes, and I can see this turn into a test case. So this test case here represents what they did. I can see here's the helper where we did that, and I can see here this is where we did the first sales order. So the idea is I have all these shareable processes. Now I also have a shareable login process. So here, this login process is what I can use to actually run my demo. So what I want to do is say I have these shared logins, and I want to use this in my other tests. Okay, so what this allows me to do is have very reusable shared assets. Okay, so my bike parts here, what I need to do is actually go edit this test and do two things. One thing I'm going to do is actually reuse my shared login. So, oops, here's my login. I'm sorry, I'm going to open my test. Here it is, and I've got my test steps. Well, I don't want to rewrite the login over and over again. It exists once, so I'm just going to drag this and put it here. So now I have a shared login. That's great. So the other thing is, one problem people have with automated testing is how do I make this very variabilized or dynamic? And usually that requires people to do coding, right? How do I actually code this system? I need to go enter the sales org, the organization, and these things. Well, right now, this is technically hard-coded. It's what the user did. So what I want to do is very quickly turn this into a variable. So I'm going to click the first to the third row and say, okay, this is great. I'm going to do a right-click and say add to layout. So notice I'm not writing code. What I'm doing is I'm letting the system do this for me. So this is, I said bike parts. So if I click OK, what will happen is we will automatically create a data set for you. So this has now become a data-driven test. So if we look, this has sales order type, it has the organization, the distribution channel, and the division. Those are no longer hard-coded things. What they are is they're now variables. And the way I see this is we said, here, you have a layout, and here's my variables and data. So we automatically created this into a record set or a row of data. So this is the interesting part. This is where people say maintenance gets very difficult because I have to write scripts to work on them, or I have to do different things to make this work. Well, in reality, what's happening is this test now has been variabilized, and I can actually say, hey, give me extra rows of data to go into here, right? So business person, I noticed in the captures, we identified and could export the data. You did a sales order, but you did 17 different types of bikes. Well, that just becomes one simple record set for us. It's a very data-driven test, okay? So from a test creation perspective and authoring, the trick is what you want to do is make sure that your tests are easy to discover what to do. Then how can we handshake that? Well, we documented it. I give someone a script of what to do. And now I can give it to a tester. They can see that same documentation with the screenshots to understand the flow. They've imported the process. They can add things to it. They can change it a little bit. But importantly, they can variabilize it or add it so that we can add more and more data. So this is the process of actually creating a test in Worksoft. So this is something that's unique to us, that we're not a no-code solution. It makes it really nice. And then the idea is you then can just run it. So if we just click it and say run, what will happen is I can say start. And here's my test. I'm going to start running. So the execution window stays minimized, but I'll go in and put it over to the right so you can kind of see that it's ticking away, that things are happening. So this is my reusable process I created. So I've got my username and password and logging in is preset. And now we're getting to the test. Now, it's doing the same thing that the user did. It started entering the data this is from that record set, so the variable data, and starts running through. So you'll notice this is an SAP Fiori web app. So a lot of people say, web testing is a lot more difficult than other testing because the screens change so much, the identification of fields is different, and all those things. Well, in this case, showing you it's actually very easy to do. We have what's called a cross-browser engine, so we know how to, say, record this test in Chrome and Firefox and Edge, IE, and then you can play them back in all of them, and then the actions will play back on the screen the same way the user does, right? So the nice thing is your test cases can be recorded and played back in multiple browsers. And we find this is what people want to do. It's very important to them. And the idea is didn't write any code, but it actually navigated all the way through the process and ran all the different things for me. Okay? So from a value prop, that's what's really important to people when they say, the reasons I tried automation and it failed. There was too much coding, it took too much time, all those things. But obviously, that didn't happen. So Worksoft, test automation for everyone. And we literally mean that because it should be easy to create. Can business people work with functional people work with QA and developers to write these tests? Yes, because we're a codeless solution. We automatically give you the documentation with the PDF files and that. And then we have these things called XFs for web optimization, so we make it very easy to test web applications. Okay, it's very easy to maintain because you can build libraries of code. You can see the comparisons. I showed you in the capture listing that I did a capture. 4 other people did very similar capture, so that's starting to identify reusable tests and make them data-driven. It's transferable, so the asset of the capture went to the creation of documentation to the automation engineer, and then that'll actually be run or maybe leveraged in disaster recovery environments for validations and so forth. So, and we do test tons of technology. So think about all the things that run on your Windows desktop that you pass to actually do your end-to-end process. You could have a mainframe application. You could have SAP GUI application. You could have these modern web applications, mobile applications, Fury, Salesforce, Hybris, all those different things. But the trick is we specialize in how to test those things, so we make it very easy to maintain. We don't make them brittle, right? And then how's it easy to scale? Well, these tests are immediately ready for Execution Manager to run locally, or maybe start running them from your DevOps platform, or from maybe you want to do continuous testing and run them nightly or every weekend to see if your end-to-end business process is working. Okay? We have customers who actually test over 500,000 business steps in an hour. Obviously, they do it through mass parallelism, right? And then they really do focus on making this part of their continuous testing and their continuous delivery cycle, okay? Of course, we're easy to integrate. So if you've got existing API tests and SOAP UI that you use to seed data or to get data for UI tests, great, use those. If you want to run this from UFT or you want to kick off a Selenium test along with your certified test, do that. We integrate into HPALM, Panaya, RQM, Solution Manager, Jira, and ServiceNow for defects. So based on your company, your DevOps workflows look different. You use different tools. And that's why we integrate to lots of them so that makes it easy for you. Okay? So the other thing is, second page forward, I'll use that one. There we go. We want to make sure it's easy to integrate into your ecosystem. Every customer is a little bit different, but we tend to see people like TeamCity, they like Jenkins, they use Visual Studio, and it's really easy to run to our Execution Manager to actually enable your continuous delivery and continuous deployment pipelines, right? Then you've got your, we want to integrate with open source testing tools. We find that people build tests in SOAP UI, they have tests in, say, Postman that see data or get data, and they want to use those along with their certified UI tests. Well, we have direct integration with those, right? Then but my end-to-end workflow includes a mobile device. So from your certify, it doesn't matter if you're testing a fact client like SAP GUI or a browser. If your mobile device cloud's available, you'll see that mobile device, and you can build the same test the same way with Capture as I did on the browser. So that can be part of your multi-step big end-to-end process. Of course, then how do you run it? Well, we integrate with Panaya, Solution Manager, HPALM to run those and get the results. And then you submit your defects into the place you're used to using, whether it's Jira, Visual Studio, ServiceNow. So how easy is this to scale? Well, we actually have a customer, and they have 10 million participants in this core web application. So it's very important for this to be up because they have 500,000 business process steps that they want to test every night to make sure it's up. So they use Execution Manager to actually call this and run all these tests. So the nice thing, certified tests can be run via RESTful calls to Execution Manager, or if you want to manage them yourself, we have a command line interface. You can run your tests from command line. The key for them is they have massive parallel execution, and they do load balancing across those because they actually want to test as many of their use cases in parallel to see how the system's running and if they're affecting each other. So great example with the government of how they're doing that. So I talked about, shareable automation and what's the value of getting onto a consistent platform. And so we've saw in the demo how business users and QA and developers of automation can work together, but how do we go beyond that? Because the idea is if we can take this and instead of thinking of it as just a test case, how do we think of it as reusable automation that's used by more and more teams, okay? So we call this the automation giving tree. How do we actually take that consistent tooling and use it across multiple things? Well, like I kind of mentioned it before, if you have a good set of regression tests and you have solid functional tests, you have your smoke tests. Well, can your operations people run the smoke tests to make sure a security patch is working fine? Or if they made a router change, a firewall rule change, can you give them these regression tests to run to smoke and validate the environment, okay? Then from test data and RPA, we find many, many people have Excel spreadsheets with their pricing and configuring type information. So in the ERP package, you need to configure those. Well, you don't want to sit there and manually type that in. That causes basically typos. But if you've got test cases that know how to take orders from Excel and put them into the system, you can actually leverage those to do your data loading. So your robotic process automation. So over the weekend, we need to update your catalogs. Maybe you're onboarding new employees from a merger and acquisition. So you need to take 1,000 people from one system, extract them, put them in another one. It's great. The idea is that QA and automation teams create automation. It can be leveraged by developers. They can run it part of Jenkins for the continuous integration to get smoke tests for new builds, to run full functional regressions for those new builds. But then operations, when they do security patches, when they make firewall changes, they want to be able to kick off those same things and understand, is the system working? Compliancy. Getting solid compliancy documents is usually a very manual task. So when you run your test cases, when you run your automation, if we give you your PDF documents to show your screens, your steps, your actions that your SOX reports can use, that saves you tons of manual time, right? So if we take, hey, these are great things, how does this actually give me a high ROI? So if you think about it, the business users have the knowledge of how things work. I'm using Capture to generate those. I'm collaborating with my automation teams. They're actually building automation, right? So they variabilize them. They come up with a nice library. Well, then what happens is from business process assurance, when we run those validations, we get Sarbanes-Oxley documentation. When we run robotic process automation, we prevent typos and save time when people need to, say, do mass data updates in that. And then we find a lot of people, it's a very low-hanging fruit, a very natural entry to do all their disaster recovery validations through their end-to-end regression beds. Just point your tests to those servers and prevent all that manual effort there. So what that does is you really do start looking at optimizing your automation and using it for multiple things. How can I reduce risk? How can I actually accelerate projects by not having to do manual validations and compliancy? And obviously, there's many statistics that say the more testing you do, the more defects you're going to find. So actually aligning to your DevOps processes and really focusing on continuous testing and running your tests daily, which you can't do manually. That's impossible. There's never enough hours in a day. When we actually start doing that, we get better quality. So all of these things together work to create the overall ROI. So if you don't believe me, we have an IDC white paper that proves this. They have actually gone out and polled customers, and they say it's 7 months to payback. The 5-year ROI is 584%. They're actually 61% faster. They need less staff to create and maintain their tests. So there's hard value and not only testing, but all the entire life cycle around it. And this has been validated by IDC's